The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. My name is Thomas Figg, and I am your host for today's webinar, Engage High Energy Choral Rehearsal Strategies. Please note that your microphones have been muted. However, we do encourage you to ask questions as they come to you. Please send your questions through the questions box that appears in your GoToWebinar panel. To do this, simply click on the text box, type your question, and click on the send button. After the presenters have finished their presentation, we will have a period of time for questions and answers. Later this evening, you will have an email asking you to complete a brief evaluation about this webinar, and I thank you in advance for providing us with your feedback. For those of you attending this webinar live, information about creating a certificate of attendance will also be forwarded to you later this evening. We will send you another email in the next business day or two with instructions on accessing the recording of this webinar and presentation files. Now, before I introduce our speakers for today, I would like to open us with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and in the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Father, your scriptures say that we should sing a new song to you. We know that within our hearts are songs of praise to you. We ask that you help us to make rehearsals more lively and engaging for our students so they may also enjoy singing their songs to you. We ask this in the name of Christ Jesus. Amen. At this time, I would like to introduce today's presenters. First, we have Dr. Richard Robbins. He is the Director of Choral Activities at the University of Wisconsin-Superior. Presenting with him is Jennifer Robbins, the Associate Artistic Director at the Lake Superior Youth Chorus. Richard and Jennifer, you may now begin.
Hi there, thanks so much, and we're so happy to join everyone today. We want to thank NCEA for hosting today's webinar and our sponsor, the American Federation Pueri Cantoris. Just a word about Pueri Cantoris if you haven't heard of this organization. It's an international Catholic choral organization providing opportunities for school-aged youth choirs from all backgrounds to participate in the full and rich tradition of Catholic liturgical music. We invite choirs from around the country to join Pueri Cantoris for a local festival event or for an upcoming national or international event. Members of the AFPC had the opportunity just this past January, for instance, to sing for Pope Francis at a papal mass as part of the international conference. What an adventure for them. For more information, I invite you to visit pcchoirs.org. That's pcchoirs.org. We're going to talk a bit today about engagement. As mentioned, it's a big flash word that you might hear in services and conferences relating to education, all sorts of education. I've identified 4 kinds of engagement that I find to be very helpful in thinking about choral rehearsals: physical engagement, verbal engagement, graphical engagement, and musical engagement. And I'm going to turn things over now to Jennifer, who will talk a little bit more about the way that this plays out in her own rehearsal process.
Hello everyone, this is Jennifer. I started working in Catholic schools as a music teacher and choir director after several years of working in public elementary and middle school. And probably my favorite thing about being a choir director in Catholic schools is getting the choir ready to sing for liturgies. As choir directors, we get to create meaningful connections to the liturgy for our students. And I just think it's such a blessing that we have a hand in nurturing the faith through music and singing. And all of this starts in our rehearsals. Here we have Newton's cradle. It's a great image to use when we're thinking about our choir rehearsals. This device was designed to show how energy and momentum are conserved. And notice how smoothly the ball bearings transfer energy back and forth. And that's how I believe we should see the relationship between ourselves and our choir, so that during rehearsal we're passing a musical energy seamlessly back and forth. it's our job to get this transfer of energy into motion in our rehearsals, and that's where rehearsal planning comes into play. I don't know about you, but when I first started out, even with the best of intentions, my planning was pretty much limited to figuring out what to sing and deciding what order to rehearse everything in. But this didn't really pan out for me in terms of the singers remembering what I wanted them to between one rehearsal and the next.
Hey, Jennifer.
And that's because I wasn't quite...
Jennifer, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but your screen is not being shown right now, so no one is able to see your presentation. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I guess I'll ask if they can see it now.
Can you see it now?
I was able to see it briefly, then it went away.
Oh, no.
Here, let me get on here. Hi there, Richard here. I'm looking at the control panel. It says that it's showing the main screen. And we're seeing it on our end, but is nothing coming through?
No, I do not see it on my end. Let me try changing the presenter again, go back to you.
Okay.
Okay, try again, see if that helps out.
Okay, sure thing.
All right, I see it again on my screen.
Okay, and it says 3-Step Prep at the top?
Correct.
Fantastic. Sorry you all missed a page. Here we go.
All right, so 3-Step Prep. So with the best of intentions, my planning was pretty much limited to figuring out what to sing and deciding what order to rehearse everything in. But as I mentioned, this wasn't really working out. And that's because I wasn't quite thinking through the meaty part of the rehearsal. So I've identified a simple 3-step prep to help me make sure that I'm planning the rehearsal with all the meaty stuff in mind and that I'm ensuring a seamless transfer of energy is happening. The first thing I do is think about the song from the singer's perspective. I look at the music, and as I'm singing and playing through it, I'm thinking, what about this song will my singers enjoy? What's going to be fun about learning this song? And then I consider, what about the song is difficult? Is the difficult stuff all the way through the song, or is it just one section? And then I can make a realistic decision. Do we have enough time to sing the hard stuff well? After I've identified the teachable parts of the score, then I have to figure out, how am I going to teach this stuff? And this was where my original rehearsal planning was weak. I wasn't thinking about how to teach it. I was just planning it and then making it up. And so this caused me to think about my rehearsal playbook and how to choose specific things to do to teach the music. So now you know what things you need to teach in the music, and you have some ideas about what you can do to rehearse these teachable things, so you can make a rehearsal order, knowing that you have real goals in mind. And by real goals, I don't mean, oh, learn the A section of our offertory song. I think of a real goal as this. To memorize the A section of our offertory song, we're going to use repetition, hand signs, Mrs. Robin's silly apple drawings, trial and error, to practice the way the opening phrase ends on do the first time and mi the next, which can be tricky for younger singers. We'll practice vowel shapes for the Latin pronunciation and learn the meaning of the Latin text for this section. So let me take you back to the beginning of this 3-step prep. And we'll look at a setting of the Eucharistic hymn O Salutaris Ostia by Leo Delibes. This is just a beautiful little two-part setting that I've enjoyed doing with children's choirs and even with my adult choir on Sundays. So here are some notes from my teaching diary. I jotted down the opening phrase in stick notation and a little solfege, and that's because my singers are still new to using solfege, and I don't want to overwhelm them at the beginning. I want to hook them in by pointing out something for them that seems easy, mi, re, do. I've written the Latin text in translation for myself because often we get caught up worrying about the pitches and rhythms, and it's easy to let text become an afterthought. But I try to take great care in making sure the text is right up front in my own understanding of the music and how I'm going to teach it to the singers. This teaching diary, by the way, is just a wide rule composition notebook that you can get at Walmart right now. And then I've made some notes to myself about the challenging part of this song, the B section, which goes into parts. So after identifying what you need to teach in the music, it's time to visit the playbook. We all have a rehearsal playbook, or a toolbox if you prefer. Our rehearsal playbook consists of the things we do regularly to rehearse and teach the music. Some common playbook activities are chanting the text in rhythm, playing parts on the piano, singing for the singers, or just having everybody sing through the song while you play it on the piano. Today we want to stretch the imagination of your playbook. At the beginning of the presentation, Richard mentioned 4 main ways you can engage your singers in thinking about rehearsal. So I created some lists from my playbook to share with you. These are where your playbook gets inspiration. And these are some great resources you can use to stretch the imagination of your playbook. In fact, you probably already do some of those now. Here's a list of things singers can do to be physically engaged in the rehearsal. The 5 subtopics are one way that you can categorize the activities. All the activities in this list involve movement or gesture. And I'll point out a couple that I use consistently in rehearsal that my singers enjoy. And that one is walking the beat and walking rhythmic patterns. And this is a great way for singers to show you with their whole bodies that they are working on some aspect of rhythm in the song. And singers of all ages appreciate having a break from the usual sitting and standing in rehearsal. And in a minute we'll do a little mini lesson and you can have a chance to do some rhythm walking yourself. You can also have a lot of fun with the singing technique category. Young singers really enjoy mimicking facial expressions, and if you ask them, who can show me the right or wrong way to stand while singing, they will all compete for your attention. And so what seems like a silly contest or a game is actually great rehearsal practice. When singers are verbally engaged in the rehearsal, they're not just talking, they're talking about something specific in the music. So talking about the music doesn't have to be a lecture. I like to use a short answer. So is the rhythm the same or different as before? Talking about the music can also be a great way to give the choir a singing break. So maybe you're having trouble with a difficult passage. You can stop and reflect. Who can describe how the melody changes at the end of the song? Graphic engagement for young singers is about supporting their music literacy. This list gives them tools for understanding the score and for helping them not just focus on the words to the song, but to move their eyes a little bit higher and start to decode pitch and rhythm on the staff. If you are blessed to have one, a projector or better yet a smart board is a wonderful tool for helping the singers know where you are in the score during rehearsal. I like to call singers up to the smart board to circle repeated patterns in the score or point out dulceños or codas or other roadmap symbols in the music. Now, I found this list to be the most curious because while it looks like there are far less ways to demonstrate musical engagement, I would argue that these apparent few are the ones that are happening the most for obvious reasons. Singing with mastery and musicality are the primary activities of your choir rehearsal. So after deciding what activities from your playbook that you're going to use to help the singers learn, you can design your rehearsal. And when I'm making my rehearsal plan, I like to keep a few strategies in mind. That was a terrible pun. Please forgive me. This fun chart of happy brains are things I like to make sure are going on in my rehearsal. Is there movement? More than the usual standing and sitting, this is musical movement and gesture that's helping the singers learn the music. Short teaching intervals. I like to estimate how long each planned rehearsal activity is going to take, how long I'm going to spend on it. Trial and error and low stress and repetition, those 3 seem to go together for me, and that's because I want the singers to feel comfortable and to know that it's okay to make mistakes while we're learning. And this ties into having a positive social activity. This could be making a little joke like the bad pun that I just made, or finding a fun way to connect socially with your singers even while you're working hard. So let's say the singers have a free dress day. I may say, everybody who has an animal print, who's wearing an animal print today, sing the first part and everyone else sing the second. And that's just a fun way to let the singers feel special and know that you noticed them, and we're still rehearsing. Reflection and storytelling are also ways your singers can connect with the music, and that's also ways that they can connect with each other, which is not only a benefit to the rehearsal and to the music, it's a benefit to our community and to the body of Christ. So now I'm going to take you through a little rehearsal plan on the A section of De Libs o Salutaris, and I'll point out how I've incorporated my ideas from the playbook list and the happy brain strategies. So I'm going to play a pattern on the drum, and once you feel like you have it, if you have room where you're watching this webinar, you can walk the pattern of the drum, or you can tap it silently in the palm of your hand, or you can do both. So listen to my pattern, and once you have it, give it a go. And stop. Very nice. I could see you walking the pattern. This is something I'll comment to my singers. I'm going to play the pattern again, and you can continue walking and tapping the pattern, but this time I'm going to sing along, and once you feel like you know what I've sung, you can go ahead and echo the pattern when you're ready. Here I go. Loo, 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 loo. Loo, 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 loo. Very nice. I really like that beautiful ooh vowel. So once I've observed that nearly all the singers are walking and tapping this accurately and echoing it fairly accurately, then we can move on to the next activity. So I have a little pattern on the whiteboard, and you'll see I've used stick notation to show the pattern that you were just walking and singing. Sing the pattern again on Loo while you read it on the board. Here we go, loo, 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 loo. There's that beautiful ooh vowel again. Give me a thumbs up if you were thinking about the solfege while you sang on Loo. All right then, let's sing it with solfege, and if you know the hand signs for mi and do, one or both, go ahead and show those to me with confidence. Here we go, mi, do, re, do, mi, do. Okay, let's pretend that that last do is on mute. Use your do hand sign to show it to me, but don't sing the last do out loud. So hopefully, you know, if you've played these kind of put it on mute game, audiation games, often someone will have fun and pretend that they sang it by accident, and we can all get a good chuckle. So now look at the pattern with that has an apple with a bite. And notice what's the same and what's different. And someone will notice that the last note is different. It's been changed from do to mi. Well, what's this? This is what Monsieur de Libs did when he wrote the beginning of the song, O Salutaris, O Saving Victim, the song that we're learning. So while we sing, look at the new apple pattern. If I sing the new apple pattern, hold up a brand new apple and pretend to shine it on your shoulder. And if I sing the pattern that's been changed, that has a bite taken out of it, can you pretend to take a bite out of your apple? So the reason that I have designed this is because I've noticed inexperienced singers tend to get tricked by this single note change. They're counting on the phrase to repeat exactly as it did before, but it doesn't. So I can continue to address this in future rehearsals, but I've set this up with this little apple image just in case they keep having a problem with it. So although this mini lesson is a detailed look at the first few measures of one song, I hope you'll see that by incorporating the mindful strategies and these imaginative engagement activities from the playbook, I hope you'll see that incorporating these into your planning process can really make your rehearsals more productive and fun. But what if they are distracted? fidgety, or tired, here's a list of some things I do to refocus energy when the transfer of energy is not so smooth. So I like to alternate concentration with relaxation. But keep in mind, relaxation may be way busier and louder than concentration. So jumping jacks are fun. If it's a safe option, singing, standing on your chair and singing is a lot of fun. Use physical gestures, movement, and vocalization to communicate. This goes back to the games we played with singing technique. Reinforce good work and positive behaviors. Just like I pointed out how beautiful your ooh vowel was. I didn't even ask you to use a beautiful ooh vowel, but that I heard something beautiful and I wanted to recognize it. And then choose carefully when calling attention to poor or negative behaviors. Again, estimate timings for specific rehearsal tasks. You can always adjust as needed. I love to plan surprise performances in my rehearsal. I love it when I've set up beforehand to have a staff member drop in, or I love telling the singers, oh, today we're going to record a musical thank you note for Father Andrew. So singers love to show off their hard work. Don't underestimate the power of gesture and a quiet voice. You can even record your rehearsal to find out how much you actually talk. And the ultimate source of disengagement, set expectations early on for restroom and water breaks and be consistent. Younger singers appreciate knowing what the expectations are early on. And now I'll hand it over to Richard.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Well, hello everyone, and again, thanks so much for joining us here at this webinar. A little bit about me. I taught high school choral music in the public schools for several years prior to moving to university in some very different situations. In addition to my university work, I worked for a few years as a full-time church musician, and I'm the chorus master for the Luther Superior Symphony Orchestra and festival conductor for American Federation Pueri Cantores. It's a long way of saying that I hope that you're thinking of some questions, and if you feel like your situation is somewhat unique or unusual, we'd love to hear about that and try to offer some support and help if we can. We've seen lots of different things in our time. So let's jump in and talk about engagement and how it might relate to our rehearsals with secondary school students, middle school and high school choral singers. Well, part of this session is dealing with this concept of the choral director as a servant leader. And this is a topic that is something that's quite influential to me. There's a book by Dr. Ramona Wiss, The Conductor as a Leader, published by GIA back in 2007. Dr. Wiss is a professor of choral music at North Central College in Illinois, and I think this is a wonderful introduction to this concept of the choral director as servant leader. After reading the book, you find that she deals with a couple of issues. She advocates teaching through questioning. You could think of it almost as a Socratic method. And students leading and conducting rehearsals, even performances. There's a sense of shared work that's happening here. I found that this related closely to some thoughts I had had as a conductor in preparing other events. It's interesting to note that the Latin root for the word to conduct, conducere, means to bring together or to lead to safety. There's a picture of a bridge down there. The conductor originally was the person who would bring a person across a bridge to safety over to the other side. In engineering, a conductor is that through which electricity freely flows. And I love this mental picture in thinking about my own job as a conductor, allowing the music to flow from composer directly to singer and to really give the student an opportunity to feel that they're invested in the rehearsal and performance process. Now, you may have sung for someone like this in the past, rather stern sort of guy. I'm not sure that the top-down approach works for me. I prefer a spirit of collaborative discovery, which is all within the servant leader paradigm. I believe that this closely models the values of Catholic education, and that's a really wonderful thing. The choral director ultimately serves the singer and vice versa, I believe. Together they serve the poet, the composer, and ultimately the music. So how can you get on the same page and really feel like your students, your singers are engaged? Well, it's important to note that your goal ultimately is engagement on the part of the singer. I don't know about you, but sometimes I hear people talking about conducting, teaching, leading rehearsals, and it seems like there's a lot of energy expended by the teacher. But there's not always conversation about the energy that's expended by the singer. Can you observe this engagement? I believe you can and you must. I believe the only engagement we can be sure of is that which we observe. The research is clear. Engaging multiple sensory and emotive processes simultaneously means that more widely distributed brain circuitry is involved in learning. You can read those authors and look at those journals as you wish, but there's some wonderful, wonderful research out there that you can read that shows some of these connections. I also believe that good teaching is good teaching regardless of age. The conductor over there on the right, David Hill, was formerly the director of the choir at St. John's College in Cambridge. Now he's with the BBC Chamber Singers and the Bach Choir of England. Wonderful, wonderful conductor. I remember hearing a talk he gave about his work with the boys at St. John's, saying that his work with those boys really informed the way that he dealt with professional musicians. The simplicity, the clarity that he had to have in giving instructions to those boys, some of whom were very new to their subject, really informed the way that he dealt with all musicians. Could you as secondary educators benefit from workshops aimed at elementary educators and vice versa? I hope so. I hope you heard something that Jennifer talked about that you can steal and take and use in your own secondary school rehearsals. I ask this question before I begin teaching. Can your middle school or high school singers actually succeed? Are you giving them an impossible task? And is that impossible task the issue that you have in engaging your singers and in dealing with problem behaviors? Well, the first step to look at, perhaps, is the music that we're giving them. And I believe that, as is the case with elementary school students, in looking at music presented in a number of different paradigms, there is a way that we can sequence for success in musical literacy. I've taken some of these from Dr. Judy Bowers at Florida State University, who has a wonderful way of presenting this and dealing with beginning music literacy. I think that this works for students of all ages, and I even use this sequence in dealing with beginning university students and beginning adult singers in church choirs or community choruses. The difference in presenting this material to an older singer is that the sophistication of the poetry and some of the musical elements that you're going to present may change. So you want to pick things that work for these students and that is developmentally appropriate. But you're going to start in the same way. You're going to start with unison singing and exploring what it is to match pitch. Folk songs and art songs are a great repertoire choice for that. If you can't find a unison song that's published by your favorite publisher, find a great sacred art song or something like that that could work in a liturgical situation. From there, I move on to rounds from folk traditions and from art composers. There are wonderful, wonderful rounds that many composers have produced. Partner songs, including quadlibets. A partner song would be a song in which you learn one melody and then you learn another song, and those two songs work together. You might think of it as a mashup. Young people love this idea. And a quadlibet or a partner song can be successive or simultaneous. So I remember a publication from a choral publisher, a quadlibet setting of We Three Kings and Bring a Torch, Jeanette Isabella. Those songs worked quite nicely together in this arrangement. You might think of a grand example like the song One Day More from Les Miserables. That's a famous example of a quadlibet. A lot of potential there for teaching. Songs with descants might follow. There are lots of opportunities in our hymnal to deal with that. Great introduction to part singing if your students are not quite confident. I move from there to polyphonic singing. That includes more than just quote-unquote polyphony, although I believe that polyphony is a wonderful, wonderful tool and a very accessible tool for young singers. Any song in which the melodic and rhythmic content is different from part to part is going to count. It's only after this time that I will add homorhythmic harmonic singing. And here's the problem. In a lot of things that are published that we find for singers, they jump straight to homorhythmic harmonic songs. They say, oh, everyone's singing the same rhythm, this will be easy. But you're asking your tenors to sing a flat seventh while everyone is singing a major chord. Well, that's a neat thing to be able to do after a few years of learning and really being confident in your part. I find much more success in building this sequence slowly over time. The difficulty there, as I mentioned, is lack of rhythmic variety. Now look at these rounds. Here are some that you might choose to present even for older singers. That setting of Ah Poor Bird is a wonderful setting for elementary school singers, but it works very nicely, and it's rather sad and solemn, and it can work for your older singers as well. Look at this 13-part round by Thomas Ravenscroft. Wonderful composer, and a whole bunch of stuff that he's published is fantastic for even an advanced choir. I used to present this 13-part round, that's right, 13 parts, to an advanced high school choir, and they just loved it. It was a wonderful introduction to the style. Let's say that you're singing a round and you've got some young changing voice boy who has about 3 notes in his range. Well, give that changing voice boy a line that has about 3 notes. At the very end there, novum, novum, that might be the only part that that young boy can sing, but if they sing it over and over while the rest of the choir is jumping around on those other parts, they will feel successful. They will have matched pitch. I love rounds, sing them a lot. The Brahms rounds, oh my goodness, I just can't even go on. Can your singers succeed is also a function of range. Can your singers actually sing the music? Are you giving them music that is impossible for them to sing? I think sometimes we are. Vocal development and range are the key issues in dealing with middle school and high school singers. For middle school, I like to make sure that my music for trebles is not too low. This is a big problem in arrangements for middle school chorus. Keep it in the treble staff if you can. Your middle school tenors and basses, voice test often and keep reassigning those parts for success. You have such a range of options for those middle school tenors and basses. You may have some boys who are really unchanged altos and sopranos, and they need to sing the part that is appropriate for them. You may have changing voices. We call these lots of different kinds of things. Cambiata, changing voice, young tenors, whatever you call it, you're going to find a few places where they fall in general. In my experience, you've got young changing voice boys who have a range of about a fifth, maybe A3 to E4 if C4 is middle C. And then you've got your young higher tenors, A3 to A4 maybe, your lower tenors, F3 to F4. Are you giving them music that's too low or too high? Possibly. Your young baritones and basses, maybe from C3 to A3. Listen, I remember being a young baritone and my throat hurt when I would try and sing anything above the bass staff. My throat felt like it was on fire. It was really difficult. Now this doesn't include that 7th grade bass who walks in your room with a full beard and they can sing a low Q or something like that. If that's the case with that singer, write a part that works for them. They can match pitch. For high school singers, I find that it's important that our sopranos and altos avoid the alto complex. Those young treble voices, those female voices especially, need to explore singing in their head voice for future growth and comfort. Don't just assign that one young lady who happens to have taken piano lessons to the alto line all the time. You're not doing them a service. You can read literature by Lynn Gackle and other folks in the choral field who have written extensively about women's voices. A lot of interesting literature out there for them. I advocate, especially in middle school, a treble and a tenor-based choral curriculum. Ask yourself this question: if you have an hour and a half to rehearse those young singers and you are spending all that time in a mixed setting in the middle school, is this efficient time? Would this time be more efficiently spent in 45-minute segments, have all of your trebles meet 45 minutes, and have your tenors and basses meet a second 45 minutes? I think you might get more done, and you can really and honorably address those specific issues that they're having in their vocal development at that time. I believe those young tenors and basses can learn how to sing. Be careful with SAB and 2-part music, particularly in assigning those parts to your male singers. SAB music, the baritone part is always too high for your young basses and too low for your young tenors. In 2-part music, sometimes I have more success assigning the male singers to the melody part rather than the lower part 2, or what you would think would be lower. Interesting sort of thing. After that, you should prepare your playbook just as Jennifer talked about. I suggest you identify those musical elements you're going to hit and separate them. You know what the elements are: pitch, rhythm, text, notation, articulation, vocal technique, phrasing, and musicality. Specifically identify these separate elements. Use them in your warm-ups. Create some worksheets that might help you. Here's an example of a worksheet I use with older singers that might include a mix of students who don't have experience reading the score. I'll separate this stuff out for them so that they can get experience looking at what these rhythms actually look like on the page and practicing them together. These worksheets can be really flexible. I'll have altos sing A or speak A, clap A, while the basses clap B, and the tenors chant C. All of these different options. I might have students lead this. I might put on a metronome and have them challenge one another, have students lead this clapping. Then I ask them to take that worksheet and identify, where did you find rhythmic pattern A in this actual piece of printed music. Your older beginners can learn how to read music, and you can present this in a way that is developmentally appropriate for them. You'll see the way that I marked all of this stuff with the goal that they'll be able to mark this in time. Here's an example of worksheet that I created for a more advanced high school choir, which could also work with a college choir, of Clausen's All That Hath Life and Breath, Praise Ye the Lord. This is a group that where some singers had some experience on solfege, the other ones didn't. I had to catch them up in a hurry, and you see that I presented at the top every single possibility of all of the accidentals that they were going to find in this piece. I also identified the chords that they would hear and how they were spelled, so that they knew if I said, hey, tenors, let's tune that E flat major chord, they knew where to go. I showed patterns that happen, repeated patterns. Really all of this piece is about 4 different melodic patterns and chordal patterns that Renee Clausen uses. You see I have rhythms there. This is great for folks to work on their own, to write down the names of chords that they can then use and hunt in their music and locate that those examples in the printed score. Lots of fun stuff there. Now, let's get into real teaching activities. So you've done your playbook, you've created your stuff, as Jennifer suggested. How are we going to deal with the real problems in rehearsal? Well, you and I both know that we spend a lot of time in rehearsal just dealing with pitch and rhythm. I really believe that what determines whether or not a group is enjoying listening to a performance, your own enjoyment, and the participants' enjoyment is related to the ability to sing correct pitch and rhythm, whether it's in performance or rehearsal. I believe that you should be honest about missed pitches and rhythms. Avoid approval error. Even with your young tenors and basses that may seem like they're having issues matching pitch, I believe many times those are simply range issues. They are not issues of, they actually don't know what a right and wrong pitch is. With groups of mixed ability, I like to address pitches and rhythms in conjunction with another musical goal. So I might say to a group of singers, we sang that incorrectly. Let me sing this for you, da-da-da-da-da, and I might add something like a crescendo or a decrescendo and say, did you hear a difference in the way I interpreted that? Your singers who need the work on pitch and rhythm are focusing on pitches and rhythms, but your advanced singers can begin to apply and add a musical goal on top of even their repetitions of that. They might, your advanced singers, while they're waiting for those beginning singers to catch up, maybe they're feeling bored. Always give them a musical activity that they can focus on. Can your experienced students guide your beginning students in a positive way? Section leaders, leading a rehearsal, taking students out and working with them individually. That can be a really fun thing for them. Can all of your students identify right and wrong pitches? Altos, raise your hand when you hear the tenors sing the correct note in this passage or the incorrect note. Even your beginning singers know when something is wrong, and they can be trained to learn to discriminate those pitches. Those singers can draw melodic outlines with their hands, they can clap rhythms, lots of fun stuff they can do. How might your singers then engage in the poetics and the liturgical context of your choral music? We're very fortunate that all of our music does have a poetic or a liturgical context. Your singers are going to have an opinion about that, whether you like it or not. And your teenage singers can have very sophisticated opinions about these texts. It can be a wonderful chance to grow and to learn together. Are you comfortable leading a discussion about a text's meaning rather than forcing an opinion on a student? That can be a thing that can be difficult sometimes, but I think if you're open to those conversations, you can find that your singers are quite sensitive to that. Your singers can learn about the background of the liturgy, the text, or the life of the author of the text. Wonderful, wonderful historical background. And as Catholic school educators, you have a very special opportunity to engage students in sacred texts that your compatriots in the public schools may not be able to engage. Your students can identify whether or not the music reflects textual or poetic elements, or whether it is presented in opposition to those elements. And your students can restate or rewrite these texts in their own words. This is fun assignment in the classroom or after rehearsal. I've had students rewrite poetry in their own words. I used to have students rewrite things as rap songs, but the more fun activity now is to ask them to rewrite it in terms of a tweet, or to write using hashtags and emojis. I did this with Carmina Burana last year with university students, and it was quite fun and quite engaged, let's say. How might this play out in a rehearsal? Well, if I'm working on David's Lamentation, a Billings piece that's appropriate for a more advanced high school choir, and I get to the text, oh my son, would to God I had died, would to God I had died, would to God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son. The composer has made a decision to repeat the words, would to God I had died 3 times. And this is an addition that the composer has made. Well, ask your students, why has the composer made this decision? The most obvious answer you might hear from a group of students is, well, it simulates crying in some way. And the composer has shown this. That might change the way that your singers approach singing that repeated text. Maybe they're getting more impassioned with each repetition. Maybe they're getting quieter. Maybe they have a musical choice that you haven't thought of. With the Mozart Ave Verum Corpus, here's this text, Unda fluxit et sanguine. It's a mysterious part of the text, and Mozart sets it using a lot of accidentals, you'll see, and really interesting harmonic language. Well, your singers don't need to know what that harmonic language is to know that it just sounds interesting. The poetry there might give us a clue. Thomas Aquinas' hymn at this point talks about Christ being pierced in the side by the spear, and at that point water and blood flowed out. Great mystery, which Mozart shows and illustrates musically through the use of accidentals and of an interesting harmonic sound. Again, they don't have to be able to do a Roman numeral analysis to know that something is up. And they may be able to connect this with an interpretive choice. Lots of fun to talk through this with your young people, and I think that they really feel like they are making musical decisions. They're being young conductors and interpreters of music. Can your singers engage with art? I believe that they can, and this is really a fun way to liven up your own choral rehearsals. Can your singers identify works of art that reflect the history of a piece, its meaning, context, musical interpretation for it, maybe something that's reflective of the historical period of the work of art, or its social mission, or its social context? You might ask your singers to find examples of this from YouTube or from searching the web and bringing examples to class. Have you asked your singers to sound like colors? This is something that was a Robert Shaw thing that I remember him doing in rehearsal. He would ask singers to start and to sound like electric blue, and then to crescendo to orange. Well, that's a really creative way of exploring what a crescendo is and making it real to singers that for whom the word crescendo just might sound like something they order at the Olive Garden. Can your students create their own art reflecting a piece? Listen, this is a really neat way to engage students who might not have a lot of choral experience or who have real gifts in other ways. You might end up using these in a worship aid or in a concert program as the cover for something or to illustrate a part of the liturgical year. Really, really fun stuff, and I find students find the most interesting things online and from art textbooks. You can also use these in interesting multimedia concert presentations. You might flash some artwork that your students have found up while you are presenting a concert or an extra liturgical presentation. It also represents a great possibility for you to collaborate with other members of your school faculty. And I think it's wonderful when music teachers can get outside of their own classroom and build those bridges across their own campuses and within their parish community. I bet that other teachers would be really excited to work with you on projects like this. Your singers can engage with movement. Here's an example of the Galliard. It's a dance used in the Renaissance madrigal, Sing We Enchant It. You might know that tune. Sing we enchant it while love doth grant it. I used to do this with high school singers, and we would actually learn the Galliard and dance and jump. The last move is described as a boisterous leap by people in the Renaissance, and man, they just loved doing that, particularly boys. They just really loved to move in rehearsal in high school. It's a great way to find study pulse. You can find historical examples and culturally appropriate examples that inform your interpretation of the music. Taking a really popular and wonderful repertoire, the African American spiritual, consider the ways that movement might work and might change in a concert setting, a liturgical setting, the historical setting of the African American church tradition, and then in the art choreography tradition, the art dance tradition. There is a very specific and accepted way of moving in the African American church context, which you can read about in many sources. Andre Thomas has a wonderful book called Over in Beulah Land, which is available from GIA, I believe, that really lays this out nicely. Alvin Ailey, the wonderful choreographer, presented a fantastic dance, choreographed dance called Revelations, which was set to the accompaniment of African American spirituals. Now, these are not things that you would necessarily use, say, in a liturgy or even in a concert situation, although if you knew some dancers who would be willing, ballet dancers who would be willing to really bring this art choreography to a performance, I think you might find it very rewarding. But even just watching Alvin Ailey's beautiful, beautiful choreography might impact the way that your singers approach the sense, the spirit of movement in the African American spiritual. You might ask students to choreograph musical concepts, and that's a really fun thing as well. These bits of choreography might find their way into a concert. I also believe that you can engage your students by helping them to learn our own craft, our craft of conducting. I believe your students can conduct, and even a beginning student can learn something about conducting. Students can signify the beat and the space between beats in many different ways. They can use traditional conducting patterns, or they can present those beats in the space within in non-patterned ways. Just showing the speed of those steady beats and feeling the space in between is a wonderful thing for your singers to explore. There are gestures that indicate phrases and articulations. These can be traditional gestures, or they can be gestures that the singers invent. I sometimes ask my singers to make up a gesture that's going to make this sound the way that you want, particularly if they're having trouble. Sometimes I find that these gestures are more effective than what I've come up with, and I use them in my own performances. And let's not forget that conducting is another way that your students can provide leadership in your liturgies and in your concerts. We have students in our Catholic school settings perhaps leading psalms or serving as cantors or serving as lectors, or they may be leading prayers. Conducting is another way, I believe, that your young singers can engage with the rehearsal process and then experience leadership within the liturgy and within the Catholic context. It's a tradition that is being passed on, and I think that if young people are exposed to the possibility that this is a fun thing for them to do in a way that they can feel that they're contributing to the liturgy or to concert settings, they will be inspired to continue to seek out these opportunities. Members of your congregation and school community will see that conducting and the teaching of choral music is not just something that happens, but something that is trained over time and something that is important enough for your students to engage in. Well, listen, Jennifer and I are so thankful again to NCEA and to AFPC for this opportunity to talk with you. And as I mentioned earlier, we're very happy to take any questions. We hope that some of you were brave enough to come up with some stuff. And I guess we'll turn it over and see if anything has come up.
Hi, yes. We actually do have a few questions in the queue here. So first off, I know a few people asked if they'll be able to have this webinar presentation. And yes, that will be sent out in the next few days via the email that you used to sign up for the webinar. So please look for that within a couple of days. And now I will go through and read the questions as they came in. The first question asks, I have an hour a week rehearsal. How can I be more effective in such a short time?
That's such a great question. Um, you know, I think that this is not an uncommon situation, and I think that it's a situation that, you know, maybe unfortunately is more and more common. I've heard of some folks with maybe a bi-weekly, or not a bi-weekly, a bi-monthly, um, well, every 2 weeks, whichever one that is, rehearsal. This makes it really challenging. I'll let Jennifer talk a little bit to that after I give a couple of thoughts here. I think that one really important thing to keep in mind is that the preparation that we bring to a rehearsal is really, really important. Obviously, you know, we want to plan to make things as effective as we can, and making sure that we start on time and that we make that rehearsal process as efficient as possible is really important. I think that means that everything that we communicate has to be engaged and has to involve multiple processes so that it's encoded faster. On top of that, though, I'll say, and Jennifer may have something to say about this, that I find there are some tools online and some ways that we can make some of this practice material available to students that can help in a way that is even better than it was a few years ago. Even for my university singers, I often will provide practice materials for them that I then post on a private YouTube channel. If they're having a tough part with a rhythm or something, I will assign that to them. I might then ask them to sing it back for me as a little homework. They can do it at their, you know, a time that's easiest for them. They can record a little MP3, email it to me, or upload it to another private YouTube channel, or you might have access to Dropbox or something like that. It's making them accountable for the time that they're not in your specific rehearsal. You know, if they're expecting it's all going to happen just within an hour once a week, that can be tough. But if you build in some of that ownership, perhaps that'll help. Jennifer, do you have anything to add to that?
I would add that I really like to reuse things that we've worked hard on. So if there's a way for you to design the repertoire that you choose, design it so that it can be reused. And I think that especially early, if it's early on in the rehearsal process, this builds confidence, and then you can spend more time on, you know, maybe the bigger masses like a Christmas liturgy. All right, we're ready for the next question.
Okay, great. Excuse me. The next question says, I've noticed over the past several years that the children, and probably all singers, sing so much better when the music is memorized. Should this be a goal for just about all of the choral pieces when they sing?
That's a really good question. I think that there is something about memorizing that does involve more engagement. One thing about the memorizing process is that they really are having to learn the music. They have to create a mental map that allows them to get from point A to point B. I think it's interesting to note that our colleagues who play the piano and folks who memorize, you know, like think of a symphony performance where someone has memorized a big concerto or something like that. Memorization is expected. So I think it's possible that there are some really good things about engagement that can occur because of memorization. I also feel like memorization can help the conductor and singer relationship. That being said, I find that it is, for me, difficult to find a way for my singers to memorize everything. Sometimes I find that the more busy my choir is, the harder it is to memorize. So if you think about a choir in which they have one performance per semester, Maybe in a Catholic setting that might be a big Christmas performance and then a big spring performance. And you're working on the same music all semester. Memorization might be a goal. If you're involved in a liturgy every week or maybe twice a week, memorization is a difficult thing. So you might find a way to split the difference a little bit. Maybe there are some responses that can be memorized and should be memorized. But I think memorization, as an end to itself, may or may not be functional in a liturgical or a school situation. So I'd say even for my university singers, it's 50-50. It depends on how much music we're actually trying to get through. Jennifer?
And I think you have to examine your goals for your singers. Obviously, memorizing all of the music of the liturgy may not be possible, but there are certain things that they're going to have memorized. If they're singing regularly on Sunday, they're going to have the mass parts and the Gloria memorized, and maybe you say we're going to have our offertory memorized for this week, but then use folders for the verses of the communion song. I had a lot of success with just printing out verses in a large font to put on my music stand just for the communion song, and then I would post these verses on a large piece of paper just for reference. So I think it depends on what the goal is. All right, we're ready.
Okay. The next question says, could you give more examples of rounds, both for rehearsals and some that could be used during liturgies?
What a good question. Well, first, I'm very excited that someone else is excited about rounds. So I'll tell you what I use with my older students, and then Jennifer may have some suggestions. With advanced choirs, I'll start there because that's the world that I'm living in right now. Brahms has a couple of sets of canons that are just stunning. You can find these on online resources, and I hope that many of your listeners know about some of the wonderful free resources that are available for choral musicians now. IMSLP is IMSLP.org is a wonderful location to find public domain music, as is the Choral Public Domain Library, cpdl.org. So a lot of these are available there. The Brahms rounds are available there. There are wonderful rounds from collections by Mozart. The Ravenscroft book that I mentioned, Sing We Merrily. There were a couple of publications that I recall using a lot with elementary and middle school singers. The Sally Terry books of rounds, one was called Rounds for the Whole Year, and the other one was Rounds from Around the World. Those are classic collections that are wonderful. William Billings, the great American composer, wrote a number of rounds which are really suitable for liturgy, as are the Ravenscroft rounds, by the way. So William Billings, you can look for those. When Jesus Wept is maybe his most famous round, but it's a wonderful book. Boozy and Hawkes had a great collection. It was a pink book called 150 Rounds, I think, that is a real standard. You find this in a lot of music libraries. I just think they're wonderful concert choices. Jennifer?
And two staples of the Pueri Cantoris repertoire are the Jubilate Deo Praetorius and the Da Pacem Domine, and those are great things that you can reuse with your younger choirs, and they're available on the Pueri Cantoris website in the subheading of public domain music.
All right. The next question may be more of a comment, but you may be able to speak a little bit more on this. It states, I teach all boys in high school. I find it difficult to incorporate my unchanged sopranos.
That's a really great that's a great question and kind of an interesting issue to deal with. I think one interesting question might be, whether or not these are middle school or high school boys, or whether it's a combination of all of those boys. I think the key there, as I mentioned earlier, really is making sure that the repertoire is appropriate. And making sure that you're identifying some of these range issues that I mentioned. Really, if you have unchanged male voices and then you have some changed male voices, you're dealing probably with something like an SATB choir. And that's the model that even the Vienna Boys Choir uses now, where they have those changed boys singing with the younger boys in many of their concert situations. So in those situations, traditional SATB music might work. However, what I really suspect is the bigger issue is balance. You might have two unchanged voices and a whole slew of tenors and basses. That's not an uncommon problem to have. I think that rounds and some of this developing literature is a good place to start. With the rounds, you might identify a line that your basses and your trebles can sing together. In the 18th century, it was not uncommon for unchanged voices and changed voices to sing together in octaves. So you might even find some historical music that is a better fit for those voices than the other the more recently published things. There are some wonderful settings available from publishers who specialize in changing voice repertoire, like Cambiata Press. That's a wonderful resource for boys' music, and it fits a lot of that really in-between stage singing that we find in middle school. Most of all, keep them singing, though. What a wonderful thing to involve your boys and young men in your choir, and to have that opportunity at a boys' school or in an all-boys choir to do that. So, great.
All right, and your next question. The questioner asks, my biggest struggle is getting teens to rehearsal for my teen church choir during the school year because of homework. Do you have suggestions for consistent attendance?
I think this is something a lot of us struggle with, and one of the things that I like to concentrate on is fostering a sense of community and belonging. And if they're excited and they know they're going to something that they like to do and they're going to see people they like and that rehearsing gives them a good vibe, then they're going to remember and make sure they get a ride there. So what are some fun things you can do to foster that? And, you know, have a silly sock night or social things that make kids feel belonging.
I know from working in high school, for instance, that especially for schools where college prep is a big emphasis, you know, those students are looking to get a big scholarship into school and things like that. What did I run into all the time? AP classes, major homework at certain times of the year, and then, you know, parents and students, rightly perhaps, who say, hey, listen, this is a real priority. I want to do well in school. I'm getting more and more homework. That's a whole other webinar topic, perhaps. But you might also you might look at the following as well. Sometimes I found that the rehearsal time was an issue. If you're rehearsing after school, would it make more sense to rehearse before school? If your students are leaders, and a lot of these students who are really concentrating on homework they're the leaders in your choir, they're singing in maybe their church choir as well as your school choir, they might be playing sports, and they're the captain of some team, and they're on the debate team, and they swim, and they do all this stuff. They're totally maxed out, right? Well, you might, as Jennifer said, focus on community. You might give them tasks that are important in the rehearsal, that make missing the rehearsal something that affects the community. They will feel somewhat responsible for the things that happen there. I also think, though, that painting a rehearsal is something totally different from homework, can be a gain for you. Rehearsal and singing is a chance to have fun, and it's a chance to do something totally different from the grind of preparing for those AP classes. So I hope that helps a little.
Okay, great. We have a few more questions here. Someone commented that your rhythm worksheets look like they are professionally printed, so they're wondering what program you use to make them.
That's a great question. So I personally use Sibelius, which is a program software that you can buy. There's an educator's discount for that, so you can buy that for probably a couple of $100. Finale is another one that I've used. Those are the kind of the industry standards. But you know, there are some freely available notation softwares that you can download. MuseScore, 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 is on version 2.0 or 3.0. That is a free music notation software that you can download and print things, and it produces very nice results. Sibelius I like because it didn't take me that long to learn. I know that a lot of people like Finale, but I found as a non-specialist, I did that worksheet in maybe about 5 minutes. And Sibelius, it was a snap for me. So if you can buy it, I recommend a piece of software like Sibelius or Finale. If not, download MuseScore for free and experiment a little bit.
All right. The next question is, how would you suggest working with third and fourth graders? I find that they have a hard time understanding parts and rounds.
Yes, and so this is where the sequence that Richard mentioned is applicable in this case. You know, I like to start with unison music and then go on to a partner song following that. And again, find things that they can hook into, melodies that that they like. If you are the music teacher, then you might already have already know where they are as far as solfege or their rhythm skills. So then you can kind of balance it in the classroom too.
You might also experiment with placement in the class. If you really want them to experience this independent singing, depending on where your students are developmentally, asking part A to move to one side of the room and part B to move to the other side of the room, going back and forth between those parts, having those young singers circle up so that they can only hear those parts. Having students audiate silently, you're conducting and then you say, okay, think it in your head, and when I point at you, sing the word that you think you should be singing. So they're developing a mental map. Having them move their hands melodically so that they can feel the difference, or even assigning those different parts of the round its own special piece of choreography. So that might get a little wild and woolly with third and fourth graders, but they can learn something about independence, and probably at that phase, partner songs and rounds are a great way to develop that.
Someone else actually had a question about third graders, and basically with them having such young voices, what activities could you give to them to help the kids project their voices?
Oh, vocal technique. There are some really, and I'm going back to my list, but if you look in the singing technique section of the list that we had up earlier, there's some wonderful toys that show the expansion of the breath and a tensegrity structure that shows, what is good posture and what is the posture of good singing. So I think it's great to use toys and as many like manipulative things. Have a that you can put your hands on to show, because you can't touch your voice. That's always a challenge. If you enjoy singing, you should model for your students with a beautiful singing voice, or you can always use a recording of a beautiful singing voice. Gesture and talking about the feeling of singing, I think, is really important for young singers. If you're not sure about that, then spend some time in the shower singing and thinking about the sensations that you experience, and then talk to younger singers. When I go up to this high note, do you feel the sound move inside of your head? And there are many wonderful resources for talking about this feeling technique and how to get singers to think about it in a certain way.
And if the issue is, finding that high voice in the first place, because some young people, because of what they hear on television, they talk too low. They think of singing as being a low thing. With really young singers, sometimes I explore things like whimper like a puppy. Find that voice, touch your cheeks, and see if you feel the vibrations there. Just getting them sighing in that high voice, and then dealing with expansion and breath the way that Jennifer mentioned. Those are all techniques that work for third graders and beyond.
Okay. See, another question here. How would you deal with kids laughing at others' voices?
Oh, that's great. I love these questions. These are all like stuff I can see and think of so clearly in my mind, especially for me, my experience with older middle school students and younger high school students. So here they are developmentally. They're all in these different places, and they're so concerned with fitting in, and making any move that is against the grain is seen as such a tragic thing. This is where I think community is really important, and I think that anticipating some of these issues might help. I establish in all of my rehearsals, even now at the university, when I'm teaching, say, a sight singing class with students who have no singing experience, maybe they play the violin or piano, we talk about being supportive, and we talk about affirming what the other person is doing. It is a rule in my classroom that if an individual sings for any reason, if I ask that individual to sing during a rehearsal, that individual is going to get a tiny bit of applause after they're done, just because they went there, they tried. But it's something I anticipate from day one, and they know that I'm serious about it. It may be that if you have students who are laughing, perhaps it's a group of friends who are laughing together at another singer as they're doing it. In those situations, moving and shifting students around in their seating chart might help. Putting weaker singers with strong singers and asking those strong singers to take responsibility for the weak singers and help them to improve and to give them constant encouragement. You'll have those more experienced singers, or those people that might have a tendency to laugh, actually being protective of those other singers and saying, hey, this person's doing a great job. It's very important to me that singers learn to respect one another in the course of a rehearsal. What do you want to say?
Well, I think sometimes with younger singers, I approach focusing on vocal technique through the use of unusual and silly sounds, and I feel like that takes the attention away from any sounds that are unusual just in the general singing. So if I say, oh, can you sing this song on a meow super bright sound, now everybody is focused on making a silly sound, and we're not just focused on the one maybe unusual sound that we haven't heard before. So I think there's some approaches you can use with younger singers, and that really involves focusing on technique, and focusing on technique consistently, so everybody knows that we're always making these crazy sounds to work on, to make our voices more beautiful and to expand our timbre, and then the focus isn't so much on individual voices.
All right, thank you. Says here, will middle and high school students be able to learn chant for a, and I might pronounce this wrong, tenebrae service?
Tenebrae service. Well, there are two questions there, really. One is perhaps just about the tenebrae service in general, and that service is a very elaborate chant service in the older rites. So if you're doing a traditional, full-on tenebrae, there might be just a rehearsal question. Now, if you do what most people do, which is a shorter tenebrae, it's still possible to put together a very appealing service of chant using, say, one of the nocturnes instead of all three. Do I believe it's possible? Absolutely. In fact, I think that chant is a wonderful way for young voices to explore what it is to sing. Here you have music written by amateurs and for amateurs, written for people that were, joining the monastery or the convent, experiencing liturgies as a part of the Mass. And it's music that was written to exploit everything that is beautiful about the voice. I find this music to be very fun to sing, and something that young people enjoy. There's something mysterious and beautiful about it for the young singer. Most of the time, these chants actually feature a pretty limited range. So depending on the chant that you're looking at, there might be some range issues, but you can just transpose those into a key that is comfortable for your singer. Or you might have your singers with changing voices only sing a certain portion of the chant while your trebles take another portion. Do I think it's possible? Absolutely. In fact, I find that chant is a great way for choirs to warm up. There have been examples of wonderful conductors of professional courses. Paul Solomonovich, who was involved with AFPC long ago, recently passed away. used chant with his adult choirs and with the Los Angeles Master Chorale as warm-up and just practice in sight reading. I think there's a lot of good stuff that can be explored there. So Tenebrae chant service, I think it's possible. It's a long service, so make sure that you know what you're getting into, and you might look at a way to cut those down. There's some shorter versions of the Tenebrae service that are available online.
All right, we have a few more questions that just came in. I know we have a few more minutes left here, so I will try to get through as many of these as we can. Another question says, do you have some examples of partner songs that can be used in a liturgy?
That's a good question. Well, you know, I will say that the partner songs that I've used, it kind of depends on your liturgy, I think, and it depends on what you're able to do. There's an arrangement by, oh, who arranged this thing? Swing Down Low. Here, we've got Google open on another thing. Can you find this? It was Swing Down Low. It was published by, oh, wow, who published that? Well, anyway, there are partner song arrangements that might work for your liturgies. I mentioned an arrangement of We Three Kings and Bring a Torch, Janetta Isabella. It might be interesting to put together a list of those kinds of things, but I would say that if you are open to exploring what some of this repertoire is, oh yeah, that was it, arranged by Sims for Swing Down Low. Yeah, that's a really fun thing. Patsy Ford Sims. There are multiple things available. You might look in publishers that focus on music for young singers, Choristers Guild, Briley, and Warner Brothers, and some other arrangers or some other publishers of music, and find some things that work for you. The more important thing maybe is just identifying it as a repertoire. So once you know what you're looking for, you'll find examples of this. Here's another one that Jennifer has used. It's a partner song featuring All Night, All Day and Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and Angels Watching Over Me. So a three-part partner song. Who's the arranger on that? Let's see, click on that there. Is that a Shram or something?
Yeah, it might be.
Well, you know, these certainly these are things that that are able to be found, and really a lot of possibilities there.
All right, and your next question says, I teach a 3rd through 8th grade choir. How can I choose literature that engages the older students while being digestible for the younger students?
Oh, yes. Engaging everyone. So this is a hat trick in picking repertoire that maybe has a descant or a special line that your older singers can handle, or maybe letting your older singers sing solo verses or small group verses in a small group. I had a wonderful success with a setting of Cunctisimus in a like an Advent Christmas concert, and the entire choir sang the refrain, and there are several verses in Latin, and it has an exciting ways to accompany it with a ostinato, a drum, or a C instrument. And then I gave these verses to two older singers, and there were probably 4 verses, and that was just such a great way to see them shine, and also a great thing for the younger singers to see them taking ownership of the music. So I think being creative and finding music that can, maybe if you think it's too hard, can possibly the difficult part be handled by your older singers.
All right, and 2 more questions left here. Next one says, what books do you recommend to choir conductors?
Well, that's a good question. You know, my very favorite book is a book that was published in the 60s by the German conductor Wilhelm Amann. It was called Choral Directing, and it was a beautiful book, I think a really fundamental book for me, just in exploring the spirit of what choral conductors do, and the nature of what we're trying to accomplish in rehearsals. He has a chapter in the book on, taking your choir out on a hike and how connecting with that feeling of walking and breathing is really valuable. So if you're looking for a conducting book like that, sort of a deep philosophy of conducting book, that's a book I might recommend. If you are looking for books that deal specifically with technique, say, there are some places you can go. There are some standards like the Ken Phillips book, which is quite nice. He also has a book for conductors of children's choirs called Teaching Kids to Sing, and that's a wonderful resource for children's and youth choir conductors specifically. Ultimately, if you're looking for technical work from a book, I think it's hard to find a book that captures everything. And you might find if you feel, for instance, that conducting and getting through, doing work with your hands is a struggle, you might, team up with another conductor in town and arrange for some lessons, or maybe Skype some lessons with someone like that. I think real feedback on how you look, if what you're really looking for is guidance on the actual mechanics of conducting, is even more important. There are some resources for vocal pedagogy, like the vocal technique cards. That was Frocka Hausman and James Jordan. Those group vocal technique cards in the book are fantastic. If you buy that set of group vocal techniques cards, you've got warm-ups for the rest of your life. Jennifer has a couple of recommendations here.
I really love the Lifeline for Children's Choir Directors by Jean Ashworth Bartle. She founded the Toronto Children's Chorus, and she really has a great way of showing how to break down the rehearsal and how to build a piece that maybe if part singing is new to your groups, she is a wonderful resource for learning how to teach part singing and layering that and building the choir up to singing in parts. So I really recommend that.
All right. I see that we are about 20 minutes over, but that's great because we had a lot of good discussion today. And, I actually learned a lot that I would have never learned otherwise. So thank you so much, both to Richard and to Jennifer, for all of the experience and knowledge that you've shared today. I know I've enjoyed it, and the audience has enjoyed it as well. For everybody who is out in the audience today, I invite you to visit our website at ncea.org to see listings for other upcoming webinars and professional development activities. As I mentioned earlier, you will be receiving a copy of this presentation, this webinar, and the slides along with it in an email within the next few days. Thank you again, Richard and Jennifer, and if you have anything else to say.
Thank you so much, and if anyone thinks of any questions or anything like that we didn't cover, or if you're looking for more resources, please feel free to contact us. Our email addresses are up there, and we'd love to hear from you.
Have a great school year.
All right, thank you.